we'll cover a few different topics today. Um, there will be a lot of heavy topics here that we'll discuss today. But I hope you guys will also hear kind of the hope and joy in this process as well. And also, I hope this will also be educational in terms of how kind of Thermo Fisher is actually already involved in rare disease today, more than we all might know, actually. So looking forward to the conversation. Apologies for the PowerPoint in advance. This was the least corporate template I could find, and I think we were successful in finding that. So a few of the topics we'll talk through today: our journey to here, my family's journey. What is ZTTK? Third, is ultra rare disease drug development possible? What is Thermo Fisher's role in rare disease? And how am I approaching drug development for ZTTK, and takeaways and next steps? So this is my family. That's me on the left. You guys know me. My wife, Ada, is the smarter of the two of us, clearly much higher credentialed. And then you've got Lucas, who's a NICU graduate. He had a surgery earlier this year at Boston Children's. And also not to forget Luna, who's a proud puppy kindergarten graduate, though I think her behavior has gotten much worse. She's kind of regressing on her skills a little bit since Lucas came home. But recently, Lucas has successfully started petting Luna. In the past, he was a little too grabby and Luna would run away, but now he's successfully petting Luna, which is a big milestone. So, I think as a lot of you guys know, the last year has been a real roller coaster for us, year and a half, really. The pregnancy was actually quite smooth overall. My wife didn't have any morning sickness. She was hitting all the right measurements and milestones. We were having a lot of philosophical debates about how we would parent Lucas. That all changed at the 38-week ultrasound. I could already tell something was wrong when the ultrasound tech really wasn't telling us anything and needed to leave the room to talk to a doctor. And ultimately, the OB-GYN let us know that Lucas was less than first percentile body weight, and they didn't really know why. They kind of reassured us everything was okay, but I think things quickly started to get stressful. Lucas had what's called a non-stress test. We won't go into the technicalities, but it means that there's a very real risk that Lucas could have been born stillborn. We were immediately sent to delivery to be induced. As I won't go into the gory details about how all that process works, but as the time got close for Lucas's delivery, I could tell things were serious because there were like 20 doctors in the room waiting to jump into action because they anticipated that something bad might happen. When Lucas finally came out, I think both my wife and I were listening really intently for Lucas's cry. And luckily he did have a cry. It was just really, really weak. It sounded like it was exhausting for him to cry. He was healthy enough. The doctors were debating a lot whether we should go directly to the NICU or whether he was good enough to just go upstairs and have us go to the post-op recovery room. So actually we were sent upstairs to the post-op recovery room, but then things took a turn for the worse. We had just checked into the recovery room. The pediatrician came in to give us the orientation of here's how you call to order food and do all this stuff. And as she was showing us that you could use a bowl to suck excess saliva out of his mouth, she looked down at him and he wasn't breathing. She immediately called a code blue. The room was filled with people right away. They took Lucas away and my wife and I were left in the room alone. And ultimately I had to leave my wife to go find out where they took Lucas to. And that's began our 1 month stay in the NICU. There we discovered a cleft palate that a resident had missed, as well as 2 prior ultrasound techs had missed, and likely contributed to his kind of swallowing difficulty. I think the NICU is a place that's not often discussed. So maybe just as a public service announcement, actually 10 to 15% of all babies born in the US actually go to the NICU at some point. Not all of them stay there for a full month. It depends on kind of what you're there for. In Lucas's case, he was there because he was having trouble feeding. In the NICU, we met some of the best people. There are some nurses that we still text photo updates to, but it's also quite a nightmarish place for anyone who's been there. There are constant beeps and alarms, and you're constantly worried that it's your baby that's tripping the alarm, and you feel guilty that you hope it's not your baby and it's somebody else's baby, and it's just an awful place. So like I was saying, Lucas was in the NICU for a month for feeding, and he was unable to drink milk enough calories to actually grow. And so we had to use what's called an NG tube. And you can actually see it in that top picture there. It's this little plastic tube coming out of that pump that goes up his nose, down his throat, into his stomach. And my wife and I had to learn nursing level skills to be able to place that ourselves, which was very intense and scary to be able to do that. Ultimately, Lucas plateaued and we were discharged. And we brought Lucas home. We learned all the skills to feed him with the tube, but things were still pretty difficult. I was back to work during this time. We were having 3 or 4 medical appointments per week at the hospital. For Lucas, because he was NG tube fed, feeding was really difficult. That's already something that's really difficult for most new parents, right? But to give some contrast, most newborns will finish their meal in 20 to 40 minutes. For us, every single meal was an hour and a half to 2 hours, because we had to use this pump to slowly pump milk into his stomach, because you couldn't pump it too fast or he would vomit. And so that period was really intense, very difficult. Ultimately, a whole exome sequence was ordered. I think a lot of folks in this room have thought about genetic sequencing recently, and actually, this is the kind of thing that gets tested for. We ordered a whole exome sequence. It was likely done on an Illumina instrument by GeneDx. It was a really difficult time, but ultimately, you see the line going up there because we had hope that, once Lucas got his cleft palate surgery, that he'd be able to drink milk normally, he would be recovered, and this whole episode would be behind us. Unfortunately, that's not quite what happened. So on February 8th was our diagnosis day, and I think lots of folks around this room who have a diagnosis or their family has a diagnosis know how hard diagnosis day was. For some reason, despite the fact that we were literally at Boston Children's 3 or 4 times a week, they decided to give us our diagnosis over Zoom. And not only that, after we got our diagnosis, the geneticists promised that they would be there for us to answer any questions that we might have. And then they proceeded to ghost us for a month and a half. I didn't even know what the name of our disease was. I had to Google this on and figure out that our disease was called ZTTK syndrome. And I couldn't even get confirmation from the geneticists at Boston Children's for a month and a half what our diagnosis was. At that time, I Googled everything. I read every scientific paper I could find. And unfortunately, there were only like 5 to 10 papers I could actually read. There weren't that many things. ZTTK was only discovered in 2016, so it's a very new disease. It's one of these diseases that has only been discovered because of whole exome and whole genome sequencing to be able to diagnose all these diseases that were previously undiagnosed. But at this point in time, things were still hard. We were still having 2 or 3 appointments per week. There was a surgery coming up. We really didn't have time to breathe at that point, and we really didn't have time to think about Lucas's future. We were just trying to survive to the surgery and hope that things would get better. So on May 8th, Lucas had an 8-hour surgery. He had 4 surgeries in one. The biggest is the cleft palate. Then there's what's called a G-tube, an inguinal hernia, and ear tube surgeries. So for the cleft palate surgery, you can actually see on the far left there, there's a picture. There's actually a bunch of different types of cleft palate. So he didn't have a cleft lip. So what you see in that picture, where that hole is actually where the uvula was. So Lucas actually did not have a uvula. And the surgery basically sewed that hole together and created a uvula from the muscle there. And over the course of 2 to 3 months of healing afterwards, then he was able to have a normal functioning uvula and swallowing pattern that all of us have. I think the time right after the surgery was really hard. Lucas, because of that process of kind of sewing together and creating a uvula, you might imagine that's very risky. You don't want anything to touch that because it could reopen it accidentally. So Lucas was not allowed to put anything in his mouth besides milk for 2 months, which for anyone who has a newborn, all any kid wants to do is stick anything and everything in their mouth. This point was probably rock bottom for me. Lucas was vomiting every day. I was still working during this time. I felt like at work, I felt like I was not able to give my all. I felt like I was letting down my family. I felt like I was letting down Lucas every day. And, it was a really difficult time for our family. What kept us going, though, was Lucas. That picture there, I remember when we were preparing for the surgery, we were packing to go to the hospital, and we thought, we don't need that many toys because Lucas is going to be exhausted after an 8-hour surgery. And that picture is actually less than a day after his surgery. His face is still puffy. He still has an IV tube in, and all he wants to do is play. And all he wants to do is read. He's still a kid, and I had to go home and pick up more toys. He's just so persistent, and he has so much resilience, and that's really what kept us going for so long during this time. So then, by luck and happenstance, Strategic Capital was actually looking at a potential investment in the in the real world evidence space that touched on rare disease. And as part of that, I met this rare disease mom who told us that actually ultra rare drug development is possible. She actually already has a small molecule in the clinic for her kid, and she has another gene therapy in the tox space for her kid for their disease. And once we had that spark that this was even possible to think about, of course, naturally, the first thing I wanted to do was just speak with as many people as possible. So really over the last 3 months on nights and weekends, I've now spoken with over 100 different biotech executives, academic medical center scientists, other rare disease parents. And what I'm here to tell you today is actually everything I've learned has told me that it's not only possible, there's a clear roadmap to doing it. We're not even the first ones to go down this path. We're actually following in the footsteps of a lot of rare disease parents who have muddled in the dark trying to figure out the path. And they have given us the advice to say, go this way, don't go this way. This is a waste of money and time. Don't do that. There's so much kind of infrastructure here that actually we were able to attend this rare boot camp put on by this publicly traded biotech called Ultragenics. That is the best conference my wife and I have ever been to. It was explicitly, the audience was just 15 to 20 rare disease parents like us, all of whom are working on developing drugs for their kids. And every single person there was further advanced than we were, closer to the clinic, have multiple things in the clinic. And all of that kind of has been building up over time. And actually, this past Friday, we held the very first inaugural ZTTK Scientific Advisory Board meeting where we convened world-class scientific advisors to discuss ZTTK and different therapeutic strategies for that. I think where we go from here is uncertain today. The drug development path, even though it's well illuminated, is still going to be long with lots of other ups and downs. But I know that we will do our best and figure out what we can do for Lucas. And I know that we have hope and we will find joy throughout this process. So what is ZTTK? All right, so ZTTK is an ultra rare de novo monogenic neurologic disease. Ultra rare, there are only 60 identified ZTTK patients in the world since it was discovered in 2016. The vast majority of cases are undiagnosed. There's an estimated 1,200 babies born per year with ZTTK, and realistically, in low and middle income countries, there's not the support services needed to help keep those babies alive. De novo, so this is a mutation that appears in an individual despite not being seen in their parents. So actually, my wife and I are not even carriers of this mutation. It's just one of those random mutations, and we'll go into that a little more on the following page. Neurological, I think some of you may be familiar with in central nervous system diseases or diseases of the brain and spinal cord. There's a spectrum between neurodevelopmental diseases that typically have onset in childhood versus neurodegenerative diseases that tend to have onset later in life, like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. But the reality of the situation is today that we actually don't know whether ZTTK is neurodegenerative or not. The oldest known patient with ZTTK is 34 years old, and we don't know anyone older than that that has ZTTK. So it's possible that ZTTK is life-limiting, and we need to do more work to understand the science there. The most common symptoms of ZTTK are global developmental delays, so motor delay, delayed or inability to crawl or walk or move independently, speech delay. Speech is very delayed, and in quite a few cases, they're totally nonverbal. Epilepsy, about half of kids end up having seizures, and seizures emerge kind of right around the age that Lucas is at, age 1, 2, 3. They can appear out of nowhere. It's when you Google ZTTK on the NIH website, the first words that it describes it as are severe multi-system disorder. We'll go into that on the following pages. And then at the bottom, there are no known cures or treatments for ZTTK today. So what does de novo and monogenic mean? So on the left, we're going to bring you back to your high school biology. This is actually the SON gene. This is the gene that Lucas has a mutation on. There are 7,281 nucleotides, the A's, G's, T's, and C's that make up our genetic code. And if you see in that little inset on the right in green, Lucas's specific mutation is just that those 4 letters right in there that you can barely see are missing. And if you guys remember your high school biology, you might remember that every 3 nucleotides codes for 1 amino acid. So Lucas has what's called a frame shift mutation. Because the deletion was not a multiple of 3, basically everything after that becomes gibberish. And so the entire protein that's produced is not functional. Just to give a little more stats around this, the human genome is 3.2 billion nucleotides. The human exome, the part that actually codes for proteins, is only like 1.5% of that. It's 30 million nucleotides. Every single person in this room and on the phone has 30 to 80 de novo mutations. They can be beneficial. The vast majority of them are totally meaningless, but it just so happens that in Lucas's case, his de novo mutation is something that has really, really serious consequences, and it's just super, super unlucky. So what does a severe multi-system disorder look like? So on this page are 22 specialties that have all seen Lucas in the last year and a half. Many of them Lucas has been seen by multiple times. Some are still ongoing. I looked at this yesterday on the Boston Children's website. There are only 3 specialties at Children's that Lucas has not seen. So we have been super users of Boston Children's Hospital the last year. And we're lucky that we live in Boston. There's so many parents at Boston Children's that fly from all over the country and live here for months at a time. It's a little annoying to drive across the BU Bridge, I will say, but I'm glad that we're able to just drive across town to get the care that Lucas needs. So that's it for the heavy stuff. Let's move on to some of the more positive things. The good news is that Lucas is medically stable. He's happy. He's delayed on all his milestones, but he's making slow and steady progress at his own pace. I think despite all of the difficulty we talked through on the last few pages, Lucas is still a kid. Every single day, despite us having to tube feed him and do all these things that normal parents don't do, Lucas doesn't care. He just wants to play. His favorite toy right now is this like little pineapple looking thing that he loves to play with. He tells us when he's bored with a toy and ready to move on to the next thing. He brings so much joy to us every single day. So what does a diagnosis like this actually look like day to day? I think every single parent I've ever met around the world wants the same thing. They want their kids to live up to their full potential, regardless of what that full potential is, regardless of if that full potential is even higher than the parent's potential, right? It's just that for us, our journey to doing that just looks very different than for most parents. So Lucas has 5 one-hour therapy appointments every single week: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech language pathology. And even outside of those therapy sessions, we're constantly working on helping him develop his skills. So even though he's now medically stable at this point, he's still receiving numerous therapies, which is great. We're lucky to live in a country where those therapies are available. Although I will just put in a plug here, that it's super annoying that after 8 months of trying to get my son's physical therapy approved, even though we have a doctor's orders for physical therapy, even though Lucas may never walk, we still have not been able to get United Healthcare to pay for physical therapy, which is just absolutely insane. So for feeding, Lucas had his cleft palate repaired in May. He's been tube fed since birth. He's never eaten a full meal. The good news is that he's increasingly eating 30 to 50% of his calories by day. So we're really hopeful that he'll be able to do that soon. On the physical front, at 16 months old, Lucas has never crawled and he's never walked. We carry him everywhere. He needs to use that little contraption there. Makes him look like a transformer almost. He needs to stand in it an hour or more per day to ensure bone growth. Luckily, he's very motivated by playing and things like that, so he's totally happy with it and he likes standing up. He's just working on it and has a long way to go. On the speech and cognition side, he still has not said any words. From a babbling perspective, he says ma ma ma. He's still working on dada, but we feel like he really wants to talk to us, you know, and we're hopeful that he will be able to speak soon, hopefully. And then finally, you know, I mentioned that, you know, half of patients that we know of develop seizures. And, you know, I think even though he's medically stable now, we still have lots of appointments on and off just to make sure things are okay. But what I wanted to tell you guys is that all of this darkness is not something that prevents Lucas from having joy and our family from having joy. You know, actually on the following slide, even though Lucas is not able to talk yet, it's clear to us at least that he really wants to communicate. And, you know, so I'll just play this quick video here. Actually, I'm not sure if folks on the phone will be able to hear, but hopefully folks in the room will hear Lucas talking. So he clearly wants to say something to us. He's just working on it, you know? All right, so this next section is ultra-rare disease drug development possible, and what is Thermo Fisher's role in rare disease? You know, rare diseases are much more common than the name implies. While each individual disease is rare, there are so many rare diseases, more than 7,000, that actually in aggregate, it affects a huge portion of the population. So if you look at the left-hand side of the page, this is representing the entire US population, 100% of the US population, 330 million people. Actually, about 25 to 30 million Americans are affected by rare disease. And you guys may even have family members that are affected by rare diseases as well. Of all of those little red boxes that represent folks with rare diseases, only 5% of rare diseases have marketed treatments. That's that little pill bottle in the bottom right corner. And maybe another 5% of those rare diseases have treatments that are in clinical trials. So there are many rare diseases that are not treated today. And it's a major focus area for the pharma and biotech industry, as we'll cover on the following pages. You know, the average time until accurate diagnosis for rare disease patients is 8 years. We're actually lucky that through the increased adoption of things like whole exome sequencing, some of these answers are coming much more quickly now. 80% of these rare diseases are genetic in origin. About half of these rare diseases affect children, and there are still thousands of Americans that have an undiagnosed disease. So there's huge unmet medical need in rare disease in general. You know, there's a spectrum of how rare different diseases are. And actually, what I'm here to tell you is that rare and ultra rare diseases, it's actually easier to identify the target in rare disease drug development than in common drug development. So when you look at common diseases that affect millions of patients, there's lots of different factors that contribute to the disease, not just genetic, right? You guys might have had this experience before, maybe say like acid reflux. You try one medication, it doesn't work. You try this other medication, wow, those side effects suck. We tried this other medication, oh, okay, this one finally works, right? That's what results in this like guess and check method of medicine, is that in common diseases, there's so many factors that contribute. Versus on the right-hand side of the page, the more rare you go in general, the more clear that there's a single genetic mutation that's resulting in the entirety of the disease, right? In Lucas's case, it was that 4 base pair deletion. And actually, when people talk about precision medicine, that's really where all of this is going, is the ability to treat with genomic medicines those specific mutations. So this is a slide I'll spend a little bit of time on, and this is starting the education part of the section. So on the left-hand side of the page, you have all the different drug modalities that are out there today. In general, the ones towards the top are the least precise, and the ones towards the bottom are the most precise. On the right-hand side of the page, these are just the first drug approvals for rare diseases and specifically rare neuro diseases. If I put every single drug approval for rare disease and rare neuro diseases, what you would see is a huge ballooning funnel of rare disease drug approvals in the last 5 to 10 years. But maybe going drug modality by modality. So small molecule, you can see that there have been examples, even the first one even being in 2003. Enzyme replacement therapy, there was a drug by Genzyme in 1991. That was the first rare neuro drug. Cell and gene therapies is actually one we should spend some time on. Actually, for gene therapy specifically, all 5 approved AAV gene therapies are for rare disease. And the vast majority in the clinical pipeline are for rare disease. Cell therapy is a little bit more for cancer. There's some for rare cancers as well. But gene therapy in particular, it's basically all rare disease. At the top of the page, you have what are called nucleic acid therapeutics in green. The mRNA is not super addressable for rare disease for scientific reasons we won't go into now. But what are called ASOs and siRNAs are actually very prevalent in the rare disease community. If you follow along at the top there, the first antisense oligonucleotide, or ASO, for rare was approved in 2013. The first rare neuro drug was a drug called nusinersen for Duchenne muscular dystrophy in 2016. And actually at the very top in 2018, you see the very first N of 1 rare neuro ASO. That actually happened here in Boston at Boston Children's. It was a drug designed for a single patient, a girl named Mila. And then you also see the siRNA one there. And then I think for those who've been paying attention to the news in the bottom right, you can see the first CRISPR gene editing therapies. All of these are becoming increasingly precise. And we actually live at this really important moment in time at the most important company that's enabling all of these advances. So on the next page, I'm going to go into actually one of the first rare neuro gene therapies that was approved, because I think around Thermo Fisher, we talk about gene therapies a lot, but not necessarily what it actually does for the patients. And I think it's important to understand how these things actually have life-changing impacts. So Zolgensma was the first approved rare neuro gene therapy, and it had life-changing results for many kids. So Zolgensma treats something called type 1 spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA. On the left-hand side of the page, you'll see some of the disease and drug context there. So before 2019, any infant born with type 1 SMA died before their 2nd birthday. There was nothing that prevented their death. On the right-hand side of the page, you see a story about a girl named Evelyn. Evelyn's story actually began even before she was born. She had an older sister who passed away before her 2nd birthday. When her parents delivered their 2nd child, Evelyn also was diagnosed with type 1 SMA. But her parents found this clinical trial for Zolgensma, and today she's alive and well. She's 4.5 years old. She's able to walk and ride a trike. Like, these are truly life-changing results. And that's something that I hope everyone takes away, is that our work to support things like gene therapy is really supporting life-changing results for rare disease patients around the world. The other thing I'm here to share today is that rare and ultra-rare drug development is increasingly possible in years, not decades. Across the top, you'll see the 3 different drug modalities that are most prevalent for rare disease drug development. On the far left, this is the girl Mila there. They actually designed the drug and got FDA approval for an N of 1 clinical trial and got to a shot in her arm in 10 months. Sadly, the disease she had was fatal, and we weren't there in time, and she still passed away. But you can see on the right that these drugs are increasingly kind of designed and developed in years, not decades. All of this is really being done with FDA oversight and N-of-1 IND submissions, right? Some of you guys might remember like Dallas Buyers Club with Matthew McConaughey and some of the HIV/AIDS crisis when people would go to Mexico to take drugs that they couldn't get from their doctors here. But we now have a lot more of that clinical infrastructure through FDA and through other regulatory bodies. So the FDA is actually increasingly supporting N-of-1 and ultra-rare disease drug development. This guy at the top, Peter Marks, who I think looks exactly like what I picture an FDA guy to look like, is a big driving force in rare disease. And there's been a ton of activity in the rare disease space supported by FDA and specifically CBER, which is the division of the FDA that approves biologic drugs. So, a few of these to go down the list. On the left-hand side, you see that they established a rare disease, pediatric disease priority review voucher program in 2019. On the right-hand side of the page, more recent news. This year, they just announced something called the Office of Therapeutic Products, which is totally non-descriptive, but it's a quote-unquote super office at CBER. And it's meant to prepare for what the FDA is seeing as a looming boom in cell and gene therapy submissions. These stats here are from McKinsey. There's currently more than 1,000 cell and gene therapies in clinical development in the US, with more than 3,000 in preclinical development. And then at the very bottom, CBER has announced that they're planning to launch something they call Operation Warp Speed for rare diseases by year end, learning from kind of the experiences during COVID. So what does this all mean for Thermo Fisher? On the y-axis, you've got current growth rate of different therapeutic areas from 2022 to 2025. And on the bottom x-axis, you've got future growth rate 25 to 28, so looking forward. And what you see in the top right is actually that rare disease is one of the largest and fastest growing areas in biopharma. And CNS is right there as well, right in our wheelhouse. So rare disease is actually a major business opportunity for Thermo Fisher, but it's just today, we think about it as gene therapy and as advanced therapeutics, but really almost all of that is focused on rare disease. So I'll move pretty quickly here through how we're approaching drug development for ZTTK. A lot of what we're doing right now is establishing a new organization. And just like any organization, we benefit from all of the things I've learned in corporate strategy over the last 4 years. So, first, we've recruited a world-class scientific advisory board. Dr. Kim Yu, the third one at the top there, was actually the one that developed Millicent at Boston Children's, the N-of-1 drug I mentioned before. Dr. Yael Weiss in the bottom left, she's actually co-chairing the Precision Medicine World Congress session with Peter Marks, who was on one of the last pages. So just like any other organization, you want to have a world-class scientific advisory board. And our team has expertise in small molecule, antisense, gene replacement therapy, and gene editing, and we're still recruiting to build out this team even further. Just like any other organization, we have to develop a comprehensive strat. We're defining what is our vision, what is our mission, what is our strategy, and what are our values. So our mission is actually to develop a cure for ZTTK in 5 years. You can see on the bottom of that chart, we are kind of just past understanding the molecular biology and thinking about initial drug candidate development. It's important to note here that even before we get all the way to an approved drug, there will be a lot of real benefits to our patient community. So for example, you'll see that first red arrow. Today, there are almost no pediatricians who would ever have heard of ZTTK, right? There's only 60 patients in the entire scientific literature. So even one of the very basic things we'll be doing is compiling all of that data from our patients so that we can improve the standard of care for our patients tomorrow, right? So that they can go to their doctor and say, by the way, here's the list of things you need to check for, because they don't have the bandwidth, frankly, to learn all of that themselves. On the second one, if we identify existing approved drugs that have some beneficial impact, patients can already begin to use some of those drugs off-label. And even before the drug is approved, even when you're in clinical trials, patients may already be seeing benefit from some of those experimental treatments, right? I think the reality that my wife and I live with every day is that no matter what, we're not going to be able to fully reverse ZTTK syndrome for Lucas. But our hope is that our work will help future newborn ZTTK patients receive this treatment in the first month of their life so that we can stop and be as close to a cure as we possibly can. So all of our efforts will have really direct near-term impact to patients and also progress towards a long-term cure for ZTTK. So just like any other organization, we've got a robust 2024 plan. We are engaging our patient advocacy group, we're recruiting our team, we're progressing the science, and we're building our knowledge base. And all of that, just like any other biotech, because really that's what we're operating here as a preclinical biotech, is supported by fundraising. We have a very focused 5-year fundraising plan. Lucas is blessed or cursed to have 2 MBA ex-consultants as parents. And we are dividing and conquering with mom taking on fundraising and dad taking on science. And so we have a very detailed plan, and our goal is to raise $2 million a year to ultimately fund all of this research. I think everybody here on the table, around the table and on the phone knows the phrase time is money. I think the challenging thing for us is that for us, time is brain. Every day that we don't have a treatment for Lucas is a day that his brain is developing not the way it should be, right? And all of the time and capital, all of these resources ultimately support us in buying time for Lucas. So a few takeaways and next steps from this really challenging journey, and apologies, I'm about to get a little bit philosophical here. First is look for joy in even the hardest circumstances. I think around here, we do a lot of work in very high stress situations, but, we're very blessed actually and privileged to get to work on such crazy and difficult, meaningful problems without life and death consequences, right? And so even in these really high stress deal situations and other projects going on and executive this and executive that, let's have some fun with it. Let's make sure you don't let the stress get to you. You should look for joy in the hardest of circumstances. The second is, don't let results dictate your self-worth. I think all of us on this call got to where we are in our careers by being results oriented. And that is important, right? But not all of your results are dictated by your own performance. And you can't let your results impact your own self-worth in that way. And that really ties in to the last question, last takeaway for me. I think three or 4 months ago was one of the darkest points in my entire life. And, I think the thing that I struggled with was feeling like I wasn't enough, and my mental health was suffering. I don't know who on the phone may need to hear this today. Maybe no one needs to hear this, and that would be good as well. But I want everyone on this phone to know that you are enough. If you told me 2 years ago that I'd be dealing with an ultra-rare drug development disease and be able to give a presentation on it and joke about it, and be able to pursue drug development on the side, I would have told you you're crazy. But it's not like I'm fundamentally different than I was 3 months ago, 4 months ago, right? All of us on this call and at this table are capable of amazing, great things, and just know that you are enough. So how to support us? There's 2 different websites you can visit. First is lukie.org, lukie.org. This links to our fundraising page. The main thing, you don't have to donate a single dime. Just please like and help reshare our fundraising message. We actually prepared a soft launch amongst our friends and family. But actually this week, as we speak, we're working on a bigger launch campaign with a full video and all of that. And then ZTTK.org, this is our patient advocacy group and where you can learn more about ZTTK. And with that, I'll pause and stop for any questions. Thank you.